Okay, the electrical system. Nearly all the electrics, at least the DC, were mounted on this panel on the side of the end of the galley countertop, also the steps coming down the companionway. And it's been pretty trashed over the years. There was a new sub panel that had been mounted right here, which I removed, and an old cigarette lighter. And then there was a bank of fuses here. And then these pretty cool pull-out on-off switches on the right. Pretty rudimentary. I mean, there's only 7, 8 of them. The battery sits in the starboard cockpit locker, kind of underneath this recessed area of the galley, underneath that light back there. And the main connection comes up to this sort of standard 1-2 all switch that's sitting back there. After that, if you do turn that on, it comes into the back of this nasty dark space, and eventually finds its way into the back of the original electrical panel. And you can see this huge thing is actually just the fuel gauge. The heart of the system is this major sort of on-off switch, which I need to figure out. This is sort of a master ignition switch, which is marked starting. Must do something more than just on and off, because in addition to the 2 main connectors here and here, there's also a connector above and below. So at some point I need to take this thing home and just check out exactly what happens to all these poles when the switch goes on and off. If it's on, then power goes to the starter. The actual starting current goes to the starter, and some of the rest of it goes over to the backs of those breakers and old-fashioned pull switches. Essentially, there were 3 steps to getting the engine started. Turn on this master switch. Then there's an ignition switch that you pull out right here, and then a starter switch. The starter switch just allows electricity to go up to a button in the cockpit. There was no key for this. The rest of these things, which is primarily lights, navigation lights, spreader, so on. I think there was also cabin lights. Maybe that was the one that's missing here. They all come back through this wall underneath, and for the most part also travel underneath the pilot berth up toward the front. So since most of them are heading for the mast, those are mostly individual wires. In other words, not 2 wires inside one jacket. And there's one extra fat wire which serves as a common ground for all of them. This is probably like a, I don't know what this is, an 8 maybe. And they come forward and power the light that used to be on top of this bulkhead, a light inside the head, and 2 lights up in the V-berth. And of course all the things going to the bottom of the mast. Half of these switches didn't work. There was a rat's nest of wiring behind it. So I kind of made a decision last fall that I was going to just throw it all out. I'm a bit of a stickler for wiring. And so I disconnected and traced back all the way to whatever item they powered, all the wires, and slowly pulled them out of that cabinet. You can see here, labeled everyone, and then began in the fall to create a new spot right over here, which is going to be next to my future mini nav station right here, which I've carved out of this quarter berth. So what I did here, and I'll try and find some photos I can post. Basically, I glued 4 squares of mahogany, little, like maybe 3 by 3, ½ inch thick, to the wall where these 4 screws are here, and epoxied them in, and then went over the top of that with fiberglass, and then that gave me sort of a mounting point for this piece of plywood, which I painted front and back. That's going to be sort of the back of the cabinet. And behind it, I glued this piece of foam, which is going to be something that runs all the way down the quarter berth as insulation. So this is sort of like the base for the new system.
Okay, I did manage to locate a couple photos I took back when I first did this. You can see here the 4 blocks that I epoxied to the hull, and then over the top of that I laid some fiberglass to reinforce it. And on the left and the right I made little pillars out of smaller blocks that I epoxied on. And then here in the next photo you can see I filled in the space with this ½ inch thick foam flooring, leaving these mounting blocks for the panel.
I'm going to be using a system as described in Pacific Yacht Systems, which is an amazing YouTube channel that I've kind of devoured. And by that I mean I'm going to have a very clearly delineated switched and unswitched sections of the panel here. So for the moment, just because I needed to power the bilge pump over the winter, or I wanted to, I don't know if I needed to, I've got a battery hooked up to a 30 amp fuse on-off switch here. This is going to be my future unswitched hot, leading to a small mini fuse block for unswitched things. And then there'll be a switch on the actual door of the future cabinet that will lead to not only the breaker panel on the door itself, but also another small fuse block right there, and then a big ground bar for everything. What I've done since then is I made this mahogany cabinet, which I'm going to try and mount over the top of this whole thing. And then I have a door all ready to go at home that I'll bring next time. Once I've done that, I can start running new lines out. I'm not going to keep 1 inch of existing wiring. I don't trust any of it. I don't understand where any of it goes. So I'll be running, end runs straight out all the way to the different parts of the boat from this one panel right here. Now this is all just for the house battery, which I'll probably mount underneath the quarter berth here. For the moment I just have my starter hooked up so I can run like a USB charger and a light and the bilge pump. But eventually there'll be a very small separate panel for engine related DC, which I'm going to put right here. So part of what used to be on the here will end up in this little engine DC system, which is like the bilge blower, the starter, the ignition, and then most of the rest of it will all be centralized into this spot right here. Okay, so fortunately the cabinet I made fits pretty well. Let's see here. And I'm going to paint the walls on the inside white too, so the whole thing is really bright. I don't like these dark recesses full of wiring. Maybe that's just me. Yeah, so my next visit to the boat will bring up the door that I've made, which will have a Blue Sea breaker panel on it, and a master switch, and some other switches.
Let's take a look at the shore power side of things. The connector is mounted behind the tiller.
In my case, one of the previous owners had installed a small storage box, so the connector was actually inside the storage box. The 120 AC then runs down the starboard side, kind of tucked up under the roof of that locker, comes in, and then comes into the back of this, what looks like a kitchen cabinet, but really it's not usable as a kitchen cabinet because of the amount of electrical that's in here, which is one thing I'm changing. And it goes to this little fuse box and breaker box. I don't know if they were both, seems redundant. And then it primarily, some of it goes up to an outlet in the back of the kitchen in the corner there, but nearly all the rest of it exits out of the back of this kitchen. Let's see here. Comes underneath where the quarter berth used to be before I disassembled it, and then runs through a hole in this bulkhead, and then all the way down this pilot berth where it starts supplying this outlet, an outlet in the head, an outlet in the V-berth, and then crosses underneath the V-berth for another outlet on the other side. So the new electrical panel that I've made for the engine-related electrics is coming together. I got my labels are coming on, and I've mounted them kind of in chronological order from top to bottom of what it takes to get the engine going. The last empty spot on top is going to have this last switch right here. And everything else here has already been replicated somewhere else except for the fuel gauge. So once I remove him and put him there, then I can take this whole panel out and I have a new blank mahogany panel that can go in. Over on the main electrical panel, I just installed the new meter at the bottom, and I've got the two forward and aft bilge pump switches are operational, and then the main DC breaker panel is right there. The empty spot over on the right, I'm going to put a smaller 4-switch panel, which will have everything related to the exterior lights. The nav lights, the spreader lights, the steaming light, and the anchor light.